The bridge of the Galactic Coalition cruiser hummed with a strange tension that morning. Commander Zekthor stood near the main display watching the empty space ahead, when suddenly every alarm in the ship started screaming at once. His three eyes went wide as he saw the sensor readings that should have been impossible. Something massive had just appeared at the edge of their scanning range, and it was moving fast toward their position. Prilma worked frantically at her station, trying to make sense of the data flooding her screens. Her tentacles moved across the controls faster than most species could see, but the numbers kept climbing higher and higher. The energy signature coming from that unknown vessel was unlike anything in their databases, and that scared her more than she wanted to admit. She had been monitoring space traffic for 20 years, and nothing had ever made the sensors react like this before. The unknown ship grew closer with each passing second, and Zekthor felt his primary heart beating faster in his chest. He ordered his crew to scan the vessel and identify it immediately, but their computers seemed confused by what they were seeing. The ship's design was strange and compact compared to most Coalition vessels, but the weapon systems lighting up across its hull were anything but small. Every gun port and missile bay showed hot and ready for combat. On Earth, far across the galaxy, Admiral Henry Morrison sat in his office at the United Nations Space Command headquarters in Geneva. He looked calm as he watched the live feed from the operation zone, but inside his chest his heart was pounding with excitement and nervousness. This moment had been planned for years, and now it was finally happening. Humanity was about to show the galaxy what they had been building in secret. Lieutenant Peter Hayes burst into the office with a tablet in his hands and a huge grin on his face. The young officer had been tracking the mission since its launch 3 days ago, and now the moment of truth had arrived. He pulled up the data stream and showed it to Morrison, who nodded slowly. The USS Valiant had just gone active with her identification beacon, and every ship in the sector would now know exactly who and what she was. The Galactic Coalition had spent 200 years treating humanity like children who needed protection and guidance. Earth had applied for full membership in the Coalition 17 times over the past 50 years, and every single time the Council of 12 had rejected them. The reasons were always the same. Humans were too young as a spacefaring species. They were too aggressive and too unpredictable. They couldn't be trusted with advanced technology or real responsibility in galactic affairs. But today that was going to change whether the Council liked it or not. Captain Lisa Grant stood on the bridge of the USS Valiant with her hands clasped behind her back in the way. She always stood when action was about to begin. Around her, the crew worked with smooth efficiency, born from thousands of hours of training in simulation and real space operations. Every person on this ship knew they were making history, and that knowledge showed in how seriously they took every task, no matter how small. The Valiant was humanity's first real warship built for serious combat operations. She had been constructed in secret over 20 years in the massive shipyards hidden among the asteroid belt beyond Mars. Every single component, from the smallest circuit to the largest gun, had been designed and built by human hands and human minds. No alien technology had been borrowed or copied. This ship was pure human engineering, and that made Grant proud in a way she couldn't fully express. Danny Pierce sat at the communication station waiting for the order he knew was coming. His hands were steady on the controls despite the nervous energy flowing through his body. This was his first real deployment after 3 years of training, and he was determined not to mess up when the whole galaxy might be watching. Grant took a deep breath and gave the order to open a channel to the Coalition fleet. Pierce's fingers flew across his console, and a moment later, he nodded to confirm the channel was active and broadcasting. Grant's voice was clear and strong as she identified her ship and stated their intentions. They were responding to a distress signal from the colony world New Hebron, and they were ready to provide assistance. The Coalition commander's face appeared on the main view screen, and his expression showed shock and anger mixed together. He demanded to know what authority humanity had to operate military vessels in Coalition space. His tone suggested he expected Grant to apologize and turn her ship around immediately, but Grant didn't back down even a little bit. She explained calmly that New Hebron had sent a distress call 18 hours ago, and the nearest Coalition response fleet was still 40 hours away from the colony. The colonists needed help now, and the Valiant was in position to provide that help. She kept her voice professional, but there was steel underneath her words. The colony world New Hebron hung in space ahead of them, like a blue and green jewel being strangled by three massive Kryn raider ships. The Kryn were notorious pirates who operated in the empty zones between civilized space, preying on anyone too weak to fight back. They had been terrorizing the frontier colonies for decades, and the Coalition had never managed to stop them permanently. Lieutenant Kyle Sanders reported from the science station that his scans showed 70,000 life signs on the planet's surface. The raiders had already landed ground forces and were rounding up colonists for either ransom or slavery. New Hebron was home to multiple species, including 2,000 human settlers who had come here looking for a fresh start. Grant felt her jaw tighten as she listened to the reports. The Coalition's slow response time was exactly what humanity had been complaining about for years, but no one ever listened. Well, today they would have no choice but to listen and watch what humans could do when pushed. She ordered Tactical to give her firing solutions on all three raider vessels and told the helm to bring them in at attack speed. The crew responded instantly with practice movements that would have made any military instructor proud. The Valiant surged forward with her fusion, engines burning bright trails across the darkness of space. On their Coalition cruiser, every alarm started screaming. Again, as their sensors detected the human ship accelerating to 0.7 light speed, Prilma couldn't believe what she was seeing. The humans were actually going to attack three raider cruisers with just one ship. It seemed like suicide, but something about their confidence made her wonder if they knew something the Coalition didn't. Commander Zekthor demanded a full weapons analysis of the human vessel immediately. His tactical officers worked frantically, but the readings they were getting didn't make sense. The power signatures coming from that small ship matched what they would expect from Coalition dreadnoughts 10 times her size. How had the humans built something like this without anyone knowing? The Valiant screamed into battle range, and Lisa Grant gave the order that would echo across the galaxy for generations to come. She told all batteries to fire at will, and suddenly the darkness of space lit up, with the fury of human weapons unleashed, for the first time against an enemy that had no idea what was about to hit. Then the railguns spoke first with a sound that traveled through the ship's hull like thunder. Magnetic accelerators launched tungsten slugs at incredible speeds, and each projectile carried enough kinetic energy to punch through a small moon. The lead Kryn raiders' shields flared bright blue, then collapsed completely as the hypervelocity rounds tore through them like tissue paper. The massive hull buckled and twisted as the slugs punched clean through armor plating that was supposed to be impenetrable. Sanders called out damage reports from his station with barely controlled excitement in his voice. Target 1 had shield failure and hull breaches across multiple decks. Atmosphere was venting into space, and the raider was listing badly to port. Grant didn't give them time to recover. She ordered weapons to shift fire to the second target and to launch missile pods Alpha through Delta. Hatches along the Valiant's dorsal spine opened like the eyes of some great metal beast. Swarms of missiles erupted into space in perfect formation. These weren't the slow, lumbering torpedoes that most Coalition races used in combat. These were sleek hunter killers with advanced guidance systems and fusion warheads that could adjust their yield based on the target. The second Kryn ship tried to dodge and weave, but the missiles tracked every movement with inhuman precision. Their AI systems predicted evasion patterns and adjusted flight paths faster than any biological pilot could react. 48 warheads detonated in a carefully orchestrated pattern that overwhelmed the raiders' point defense grid completely. The aft section of the ship simply ceased to exist, turning into an expanding cloud of debris and frozen atmosphere. Back on Earth, at the UNSC command center, every person in the room had gone completely silent. Analysts and officers and visiting dignitaries stood frozen, watching the tactical displays with held breath. Someone whispered a prayer or a curse, and Admiral Morrison heard it but didn't respond. He just watched with satisfaction as his plan unfolded exactly as predicted. The third Kryn raider captain had seen enough. He was a veteran of hundreds of raids across dozens of systems, and he had never encountered anything like this human ship. Her weapons were beyond anything in the Coalition databases. Her tactics were aggressive to the point of insanity. Her crew worked together with coordination that seemed almost telepathic. He ordered his ship to jump to hyperspace immediately, but Pierce caught the energy buildup on sensors and reported it to Grant. She smiled coldly and turned to Lieutenant Jenny Brooks at the weapons console. Brooks had been waiting for this moment since they left. Earth orbit, and her finger was already hovering over the firing. Control Grant gave the order to punch. Through their jump drive, and Brooks responded with pleasure in her voice. The particle beam cannon charged up in less than 2 seconds. A lance of coherent particles contained in a magnetic bottle reached across 50,000 kilometers of space in an instant. The beam burned through the Raider's engine section like a cutting torch through butter. The Kryn ship went completely dark as every system failed at once. Emergency power tried to kick in, but the damage was too severe. The massive vessel began tumbling end over end with no power and no control. Inside, the ship alarms were screaming and crew members were scrambling for escape pods. Grant opened a general channel to all 3 Raider vessels. Her voice was calm and professional as she informed them they had 60 seconds to stand down and prepare to be boarded, or the next volley would go through their command decks. She meant every word, and somehow the Kryn captains knew it. The response came in less than 30 seconds. Escape pods began launching from all 3 damaged Raiders like schools of frightened fish fleeing a predator. The crews were abandoning their ships and surrendering, rather than face more of the humans' terrifying weapons. Grant allowed herself a small smile of satisfaction before turning to Pierce and ordering him to get Admiral Morrison on the line. Morrison's weathered face appeared on the screen a moment later, and Grant could see the pride in his eyes even though he kept his expression neutral for the sake of everyone watching. She reported mission accomplished with New Hebron secured and 3 enemy vessels neutralized. Ammunition expenditure was minimal, and they had taken 0 damage. Morrison nodded slowly and told her the hard part was about to begin. The Galactic Coalition was demanding immediate communication, and he suspected they had quite a few questions. Down on the surface of New Hebron, colonists emerged from shelters and hiding places as Valiant's Marines landed and secured the area. The Kryn ground forces had surrendered as soon as they realized their ships were destroyed. Human soldiers in advanced combat armor rounded up the Raiders efficiently while medical teams began treating injured colonists. A human settler named Jack Morrison walked out of a shelter, holding his 10-year-old daughter Emma. They had been hiding in the dark for 18 hours, listening to explosions and weapon fire outside. Now they stood in the sunlight watching human ships overhead and human soldiers protecting them. Jack felt tears running down his face, but he didn't wipe them away. Emma looked up at the sky where the Valiant hung like a silver guardian angel. She asked her father if that was the ship that saved them, and Jack pulled her close while nodding. He told her about how the captain was brave and how every person on that ship was brave. He explained that the people who built the ship were brave too, and the people who dreamed humans could build something like that were the bravest of all. The Coalition cruiser maintained a safe distance while monitoring everything. Commander Zekthor watched the tactical replay over and over, trying to understand what he had witnessed. The human ship had destroyed 3 Raider cruisers in under 10 minutes. The technology gap between what humanity was supposed to have and what they actually possessed was staggering. Prilma pulled up the weapons analysis and showed it to Zekthor with trembling tentacles. Every weapon system on the Valiant was beyond current Coalition military technology by at least 20 years. The humans had developed all of this in secret while pretending to be a minor species that needed protection. The implications were frightening. Zekthor sent an urgent message to the Council of 12. He recommended immediate emergency session to discuss the human situation. This changed everything about how the Coalition viewed Earth and its capabilities. The Council needed to decide quickly how to respond before things spiraled out of control. Grant walked through her ship, checking on her crew after the battle. Everyone was riding high on adrenaline and success. They had trained for years for this moment, and they had performed perfectly. But Grant knew this was just the beginning. The real test would come when they faced the political consequences of what they had done today. She found Brooks at her station running diagnostics on the particle beam cannon. The weapon had performed flawlessly, but Brooks was the type who checked everything twice. Grant complimented her on the excellent shooting, and Brooks grinned. She said it felt good to finally use these weapons for real instead of simulations. Sanders approached with his tablet showing the final casualty counts. 0 human casualties, 14 colonist injuries from the raid before they arrived, approximately 300 Kryn casualties across the 3 ships. It was a decisive victory by any measure, and Grant felt proud of her crew. Morrison contacted her again with new orders. They were to remain in orbit around New Hebron, and maintained security until coalition forces arrived. Under no circumstances were they to engage in further combat unless directly attacked. The political situation was delicate, and Earth needed to appear reasonable and measured. Grant acknowledged the orders and passed them to her crew. The excitement began to fade as reality set in. They had won the battle, but now came the harder fight of winning the peace and convincing the galaxy that humanity deserved respect as equals, rather than fear as threats. The Grand Chamber of the Galactic Coalition was a marvel that never failed to impress visitors. The vast sphere could hold representatives from hundreds of worlds either in person or via hologram. Today, every single seat was filled and the chamber buzzed with 1,000 conversations in 100 different languages. The noise created a sound like wind rushing through some enormous alien forest. Admiral Henry Morrison stood at the center platform reserved for those addressing the Council of 12. He was flanked by Ambassador Claire Mitchell and General Frank Cooper. All three wore their dress uniforms and maintained calm professional expressions, despite the hostile stares coming from many directions. The 12 counselors sat in their elevated positions looking down at the humans with expressions ranging from shock to anger to something that might have been fear. Counselor Vexnar spoke first. His crystalline body resonated with sound that the chamber's translation system rendered into every known language simultaneously. He was the primary voice of the council, and his words carried enormous weight. He accused humanity of violating coalition law by building and deploying military vessels without authorization. He said they had demonstrated weapons technology that was never submitted for review or approval. He demanded an explanation. Morrison stepped forward with his posture straight and his voice calm. He explained with great respect that humanity had violated no actual laws. The Interstellar Treaty prohibited weapons of mass destruction and aggressive military action against coalition members. The Valiant had done neither. She had responded to a distress call and neutralized pirates. He asked if the Council was now defending the Kryn raiders. A ripple of reaction moved through the chamber like a wave. Morrison had struck first and struck hard. He wasn't going to let them put humanity on the defensive. Mitchell and Cooper stood ready to support him. But for now, Morrison was handling the Council alone. Counselor Pelmora leaned forward in her tank. She was an aquatic being whose species valued careful thought and measured response. She said the issue wasn't the intervention, but the capability. The Valiant possessed firepower exceeding most coalition warships. Humanity had developed this technology in secret, which violated the spirit of transparency that supposedly bound the alliance together. Ambassador Mitchell spoke up with her voice clear and strong. She reminded the Council that they had denied humanity access to defensive technology sharing programs 6 times. They had voted against including Earth in joint security operations repeatedly. When humans asked for help protecting their colonies, they were told to be patient and wait their turn. So humanity had stopped waiting and started taking care of themselves. General Cooper activated a holographic display showing a star map of human space. Red markers indicated dozens of locations scattered across multiple systems. He explained that in the past 20 years, human colonies and vessels had been attacked 47 times by pirates and raiders. Coalition response time averaged 38 hours. Human response time was now under 6 hours. They built the Valiant because nobody else was going to protect their people. The chamber erupted into heated debate. Some species argued that humanity had every right to self-defense. Others insisted this was exactly why the young aggressive race couldn't be trusted with full membership. Accusations flew back and forth while the counselors tried to maintain order. Counselor Zeklon raised a clawed hand for silence. His reptilian species had been at peace for 6 centuries, and they took pride in their diplomatic solutions. He acknowledged that humans made valid points about response times and self-defense. However, the technology demonstrated exceeded defensive requirements. The Valiant destroyed 3 cruisers in 10 minutes. That level of offensive capability posed a threat to coalition security. Morrison had been waiting for exactly this argument. He explained that fast, decisive victories actually meant fewer coalition resources spent on anti-piracy operations. It meant safer space lanes for commerce. It meant colonists didn't have to wait 2 days wondering if help would arrive before they were killed or enslaved. He pulled up detailed scans of the Valiant's weapon systems for everyone to see. Every weapon was designed for precision and efficiency. The railguns used kinetic energy, causing minimal collateral damage. The missiles had selectable yields and could be disarmed remotely. The particle beams could be calibrated from cutting torch to ship killer. These weapons were built to protect, not to conquer, and there was a difference. Counselor Vexnar's crystalline body chimed softly, which translated as deep contemplation. He asked what guarantee the Coalition had that humanity would use this power responsibly. Humans were a young species prone to conflict and aggression. Their own history was soaked in blood from countless wars. Morrison met the counselor's gaze without flinching. He admitted that yes, human history was violent. They had fought wars and made mistakes and learned hard lessons. But the key word was learned. They had unified their world not through conquest but through cooperation. They reached for the stars to explore, not to dominate. When they found other species out here, they didn't attack. They asked to join and learn and contribute to something greater than themselves. He gestured to displays showing the rescued colonists of New Hebron being evacuated under protection of Valiant's Marines. Those people weren't all human, but they had been saved anyway because it was the right thing to do. That was who humanity was. He asked the Council to judge them by their actions, not by their fears. The Council of 12 called for a recess to debate privately. In a side chamber reserved for visiting delegations, Morrison and his team waited with other human officials and military officers. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. Lieutenant Commander Chris Palmer paced nervously, asking if Morrison thought they would vote for sanctions. Would they try to force Earth to decommission the fleet? Morrison sat calmly reviewing data on his tablet. He told Palmer they might try, but they wouldn't succeed. He sounded completely confident. Ambassador Mitchell raised an eyebrow and asked why he was so sure. Morrison explained that humanity held the cards now. For 200 years they played by coalition rules and accepted limitations and hoped to be seen as equals. Today they showed the galaxy they didn't need permission to be strong. That changed everything about the power dynamic, General Cooper agreed. Half the council was terrified of humans now. The other half was impressed. Either way, they couldn't ignore Earth anymore. The days of dismissing humanity as minor players were over forever. The chamber doors suddenly opened and a delegation entered that made everyone go silent. They were Krell warriors standing 7 feet tall in biomechanical armor. The Krell represented one of the most militaristic species in the Coalition, and they didn't usually involve themselves in political debates. Their leader, War Prime Krell Dan, approached Morrison directly. He asked about the Valiant and wanted to know her capabilities in detail. The Krell were not known for social niceties, but they respected strength above everything else. Morrison stood slowly and met the warrior's gaze. He explained that Valiant was one of 7 ships in her class. Each could operate independently in deep space for 18 months. Armament included railgun batteries and missile systems and directed energy weapons and electronic warfare suites. She could engage 40 targets simultaneously and maintain effectiveness against capital ships 3 times her mass. Krell Dan's eyes seemed to gleam behind his helmet visor. He said it was impressive. Humanity built weapons the way the Krell once did before the Coalition convinced them to limit military development. The Coalition called it peace, but the Krell called it weakness. Morrison replied carefully that the Coalition preferred diplomacy to warfare, and there was wisdom in that approach. But Krell Dan tapped his chest plate and said there was also wisdom in being prepared for when diplomacy failed. The Krell Union was proposing an alliance with humanity. They would support Earth's petition for full membership. In exchange, they wanted technology-sharing agreements and joint military exercises. Morrison glanced at Mitchell, who gave a subtle nod. He told the War Prime they were open to discussions, but humanity wasn't looking to militarize the Coalition. They wanted peace, but they also wanted to be strong enough to protect that peace. Krell Dan extended his hand in what his species considered a gesture of respect. He said the weak seek protection from the strong, but the strong seek allies among equals. Today, humanity proved they were equals, and that was worthy of respect. The Krell delegation departed, and Cooper let out a low whistle. He said that was going to complicate things significantly. If humanity aligned with the Krell, then half the council would lose their minds. The Krell had a reputation for being aggressive and militaristic, and many species feared them. Mitchell looked thoughtful as she considered the implications. She pointed out that it might actually help their case. If the council was worried about a Krell-human alliance becoming too powerful, then the logical move was to bring humanity into the Coalition fold where they had more influence over human actions. Sometimes the best strategy was to make opponents realize they couldn't afford to let you lose. Morrison smiled at that observation. Mitchell understood the game they were playing. This wasn't just about military strength or technological capability. It was about political leverage and forcing the Council to see humanity as partners rather than problems. The Krell offer gave Earth exactly that leverage. Hours passed while the Council debated behind closed doors. Reports filtered out through various channels about heated arguments and close votes. Some councilors wanted to impose sanctions and force humanity to decommission their fleet. Others argued that would only drive Earth away from the coalition entirely. A few suggested military action, which was immediately shouted down as insane. The moderate faction, led by Pelmora, worked to find a middle ground that would satisfy both the hawks and doves on the Council. She argued that bringing humanity into full membership with appropriate oversight was safer than leaving them outside where the coalition had no influence at all. Her arguments slowly gained support as the hours wore on. Finally, the Council reconvened in the Grand Chamber. The crowd was even larger than before as news of the Krell meeting had spread across the coalition like wildfire. Dozens of species now had strong opinions about the human question, and pressure was building from all directions. Councillor Vexnar called the session to order. His crystalline form chimed for attention, and gradually the chamber fell silent. He announced that the Council of 12 had deliberated on the matter of humanity's military development and their actions in the Sirius sector. They had reached a decision. Morrison kept his expression carefully neutral. He showed no hope or fear or anxiety. He simply stood there waiting to hear the verdict that would determine Earth's future in the galaxy. Vexnar explained that after careful consideration, the Council had voted to grant humanity provisional membership in the Galactic Coalition. Full membership would be reviewed in 5 standard years. This membership came with conditions that humanity would need to accept. The first condition was that humanity must open all military technology for coalition inspection and evaluation. The second was that human vessels must operate under coalition military protocols when participating in joint operations. The third was that humanity must submit to the same restrictions on weapons of mass destruction that bound all member species. Morrison listened carefully to each condition. None of them were unreasonable, and all of them were things Earth could agree to without compromising their security or independence. The Council was being surprisingly fair, which suggested Pelmora's moderate faction had won the internal debate. Vexnar paused, and his form shifted colors in a way that suggested he was choosing his next words carefully. He acknowledged that humanity had demonstrated both capability and restraint in their use of force. The coalition would extend to Earth, full participation in defensive operations and technology-sharing programs and security councils. All of this would be effective immediately. Morrison stepped forward and spoke clearly for everyone to hear. The United Earth government accepted these terms. He said humanity looked forward to working with the coalition as partners and allies. His voice carried pride and satisfaction, but also humility and respect. Vexnar continued with one more matter. The Kryn Collective had filed a formal complaint claiming humanity used excessive force in the Sirius sector incident. They were demanding reparations for the destroyed vessels and lost crew members. This time Morrison couldn't quite suppress his smile. He pointed out with great respect that the Kryn had attacked a defenseless colony first. The Valiant defended innocent civilians using appropriate force to neutralize an active threat. If the Kryn Collective wanted to avoid similar incidents in the future, then perhaps they should stop raiding coalition colonies. A sound like laughter rippled through parts of the chamber. Even some of the councillors seemed amused by Morrison's response. The Kryn complaint was so ridiculous that it actually helped humanity's case by making the raiders look foolish. Councillor Pelmora spoke up from her tank. She announced that the Council found humanity's response to the raid both appropriate and justified. The Kryn complaint was dismissed. Furthermore, the Coalition was authorizing human vessels to engage in anti-piracy operations throughout Coalition space with the understanding that they would coordinate with local authorities when possible. Morrison bowed slightly in acknowledgement. He thanked the Council for their trust and promised that humanity would work to prove worthy of that trust every single day. His words were sincere, and many in the chamber could hear that sincerity. The session ended, and Morrison's team was immediately surrounded by representatives from dozens of species. Some wanted to congratulate Earth on their acceptance. Others wanted to discuss trade agreements or cultural exchanges. A few wanted to know more about human military technology and capabilities. Mitchell and Cooper handled most of the initial conversations while Morrison took a moment to send a message back to Earth. He informed the President and the General Assembly that provisional membership had been granted. Humanity was officially part of the Galactic Coalition now. The response from Earth came back within minutes. Celebrations were breaking out in every major city across the planet. Palmer approached Morrison with a concerned expression. He asked quietly if the Admiral thought they had given up too much by agreeing to open their technology for inspection. Morrison shook his head. He explained that they hadn't given up anything important. The Coalition would inspect the Valiant systems, and they would learn some things. But the real secrets were in the manufacturing processes, and the materials, science, and the training programs. Those would remain human advantages for years to come. General Cooper joined them and said they needed to discuss the Krell situation. The alliance offer was still on the table, and Earth needed to decide how to respond. Morrison agreed that was important, but not urgent. They could take their time and negotiate carefully. The Krell respected strength and patience equally, so there was no need to rush into anything. Ambassador Mitchell returned from her conversations with useful intelligence. She reported that at least 20 species were interested in establishing closer ties with humanity, now that Earth was officially a coalition member. The economic opportunities alone were staggering. Human manufacturing and technology could open up entirely new markets across the galaxy. Morrison felt a weight lift from his shoulders. They had done it. After 2 centuries of being dismissed and underestimated, humanity had finally earned their place at the table. The provisional membership would become full membership in 5 years. He had no doubt about that. Earth would prove themselves worthy, and the Council would have no choice but to grant full status. But even as he celebrated internally, Morrison knew this was just the beginning. Being accepted into the coalition meant new responsibilities and new challenges. Humanity would need to prove they could work with other species. They would need to contribute to galactic security and prosperity. They would need to show that their strength came with wisdom and restraint. The human delegation left the Grand Chamber to a mixture of applause and nervous whispers. Some species were genuinely happy to welcome Earth. Others remained suspicious and wary. That was fine. Morrison didn't expect or need universal love. He just needed respect and opportunity. Those they had earned today. As they walked through the corridors of the Coalition station, Cooper asked Morrison what he thought the next big challenge would be. Morrison considered the question carefully before answering. He said the hardest part would be remembering who they were and what they stood for. Success could change people and nations just as much as failure. They needed to stay true to their values even as they grew stronger and more influential. Mitchell agreed with that assessment. She said humanity's greatest strength wasn't their weapons or technology. It was their ability to adapt and learn and cooperate with others. As long as they maintained those qualities, they would thrive in the coalition. The moment they became arrogant or isolated, they would lose everything they had gained. 6 months after the battle at New Hebron, the USS Valiant docked at Coalition Station Harmony. The massive space station served as the Alliance's military and diplomatic hub, orbiting a neutron star in neutral territory. Captain Lisa Grant stood at the viewport watching her crew prepare for their first real shore leave since the mission began. Many of them were excited to explore a station that hosted species from across the entire galaxy. Danny Pierce reported an incoming transmission from Admiral Morrison. Grant moved to her ready room to take the call privately. Morrison's face appeared on her screen, looking pleased with recent developments. He congratulated her on the successful patrol missions over the past 6 months. He mentioned that she had intercepted another Kryn raider group near the Antares colonies. Grant confirmed the report. 3 ships had attempted to raid a mining operation, but the Valiant disabled their vessels and turned the crews over to Coalition security forces. 0 casualties on either the human or colonist side. The operation had been smooth and professional. The Kryn were learning to avoid systems where human ships might be patrolling. Morrison informed her that the Council had approved construction of 15 additional ships in the Valiant class. The program was being expanded significantly. Earth was also establishing joint training protocols with 7 coalition species, including the Krell. The alliance with the Krell had been formalized 3 months ago, and it was already paying dividends in terms of intelligence sharing and coordinated operations. Grant said that was outstanding news. More ships meant better coverage of human space and coalition territory. It meant faster response times and more effective anti-piracy operations. Morrison's expression grew more serious. He reminded her that the galaxy was watching humanity now. Every action they took and every decision they made reflected on all of humanity. They had to get this right because there wouldn't be second chances. Grant understood completely. She promised not to let him down. Morrison smiled and ended the transmission. Grant sat alone for a moment, thinking about the weight of responsibility they all carried. The Valiant had become a symbol of human capability and determination. Everything her crew did mattered more than they probably realized. Commander Paul Stevens knocked on her door and entered. He commented that they weren't the odd ones out anymore. Humanity had gone from outsiders to respected members in just 6 months. The transformation was remarkable when you stopped to think about it. Grant agreed, but pointed out that the real work was just beginning. Being accepted was one thing, but proving they deserved that acceptance was another. She gestured to the viewport where dozens of coalition ships drifted in organized patterns. They were part of something bigger now, and they had to prove themselves worthy of that partnership every single day. Stevens smiled and said they already had proved it. They saved New Hebron and stopped multiple raider groups and conducted themselves professionally in every situation. Grant acknowledged that, but explained it wasn't enough to just be competent warriors. They had to show what humanity could be as partners and allies. That would take more than firepower and tactical skill. Down on Earth in a small apartment in Seattle, a former colonist named Jack Morrison watched the news broadcast. The screen showed the USS Valiant docked at Harmony Station with coalition vessels all around her. Jack had been one of the people rescued from New Hebron 6 months ago. He and his daughter Emma had been evacuated while human Marines held off Kryn ground forces. Emma sat beside her father on the couch, watching the screen with wide eyes full of wonder. She asked if that was the ship that saved them. Jack pulled her close and confirmed it was the same ship. Emma was quiet for a moment before saying that the captain must have been really brave. Jack agreed that Captain Grant was brave, but he explained that every person on that ship was brave too. The people who built it were brave. The people who dreamed that humans could build something like that were brave. That was what made him proud to be human. Not just the strength, but the vision and determination to reach for something greater. Emma thought about that and then announced that when she grew up, she wanted to be like Captain Grant. She wanted to protect people and help them. Jack felt unexpected tears stinging his eyes. He told his daughter that she would be exactly that. She would make a difference in the galaxy just like the crew of the Valiant. Across the galaxy, on dozens of worlds and hundreds of stations, similar conversations were happening. Parents told their children about the brave humans who stood up to protect the innocent. Young people of multiple species talked about enlisting in coalition defense forces inspired by human example. Humanity had arrived on the galactic stage not as supplicants, begging for acceptance, but as equals demanding respect. In the Coalition Security Council's Strategic Planning Room, representatives from 40 species gathered for a classified briefing. The holographic display showed humanity's expanding sphere of influence. Trade routes and military deployments and diplomatic initiatives spread across multiple sectors like a growing web. Councillor Vexnar addressed the assembly. He pointed out that for 2 centuries the coalition treated humanity as children needing guidance and protection. Now they recognized humans as adults capable of defending themselves and contributing to collective security. This changed the balance of power within the coalition in ways they were still working to understand. War Prime Kreldon rumbled his agreement. He said humanity understood what many species had forgotten. Peace was not maintained by weakness and hope. It was maintained by strength and vigilance. The Krell had been saying this for generations, but nobody listened until humans demonstrated it with action. A Pelteran diplomat gestured with multiple limbs. She asked at what cost this new militarization came. Did they really want to encourage more weapons development and more focus on military solutions? Several other representatives echoed her concerns about an arms race developing. Another representative pointed out that the weapons already existed. The question wasn't whether humanity had military capability, but whether the coalition worked with them or against them. Partnership was clearly the logical choice. Trying to contain or limit humanity would only drive them away from coalition influence entirely. The meeting continued late into the station's night cycle. Debates ranged across topics from technology sharing to joint military commands to economic integration. But the conclusion was becoming inevitable. Humanity had changed the rules and the coalition would adapt or become irrelevant. On the bridge of the USS Valiant, Captain Grant stood her final watch before shore leave officially began. The second shift had taken over running the ship. The lighting was dimmed for night operations and everything was quiet and efficient. Grant walked to the forward viewport and stood there looking out at the vast station and the ships beyond. A young ensign named Katie Wright approached nervously. She apologized for disturbing the captain but said she wanted to express her gratitude. Grant turned with a surprised expression and asked what for. Wright explained that Grant had proved humanity belonged out here among the stars. Her parents had told her not to join the Navy. They said it was too dangerous and humans didn't have any business pretending to be soldiers in space. But Grant showed everyone what humans could do. She made it possible for people like Wright to serve with pride. Grant smiled gently. She told Wright that she had just done her job like everyone else on the crew. But she understood what the young ensign meant. Sometimes you had to prove yourself before people would give you a chance to show what you were capable of. Wright asked if Grant thought the coalition really accepted humanity now. Grant looked back out at the stars and considered her answer carefully. She said some species accepted humans completely, while others remained suspicious and some were still deciding. But that was okay. They weren't looking for universal love. They were looking for respect and partnership and the chance to contribute. Those things they had earned. Wright nodded and saluted before returning to her station. Grant remained at the viewport for a while longer, thinking about everything that led to this moment. The centuries of human history with all its struggles and triumphs. The slow climb from one small planet to the vast stage of galactic civilization. Humanity had arrived not with a whimper or a plea, but with a declaration. They were here and they were armed and they were ready to take their place among the stars. The unidentified warship signal had been detected. It had been confirmed as human and fully armed for battle. The galaxy would never forget that moment. Back on Earth, Admiral Morrison stood in his office before a wall displaying the names of every human ship now in service. The Valiant and the Defiant and the Resolute and the Invincible and 3 others with 8 more under construction. Soon there would be 15 new ships added to that wall. Colonel Linda Shaw entered with a datapad containing the latest polling numbers from coalition worlds. Public opinion on humanity had shifted dramatically. 63% now viewed Earth as a valuable coalition partner. 6 months ago, it had been barely 30%. Morrison took the pad but didn't look at it immediately. He asked Shaw what she thought had changed. Shaw smiled and said humanity stopped asking for permission and started taking responsibility. The galaxy respected that key.